A very good day to all participants who have joined us for this webinar on transboundary waters. We're really delighted to have such a big audience. Almost 390 people from across the world have registered to join us. And so we're really looking forward to a very good event. And I'm happy to say that I recognize a number of colleagues and friends in the list of participants. So a very warm welcome to all of them. Just to let you know that in the course of the webinar, we will be conducting some live polling of the opinions of the audience. So a question will pop up on your screens and we ask you to respond with your opinion. And then we will discuss these responses from the audience during the session. And so my name is Shami Puri. I'm the director of Center for Sustainable Solutions in Applied Hydrology and formerly the Secretary General of the International Association of Hydrogeologists. And I have the honor of chairing this webinar and wish to thank the Middle East Water Forum for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, we've prepared a very rich program of presentations and discussions with a very distinguished panel whose full bios appear on the website, but let me introduce them to you now. We have Raya Stefan, who's the international consultant with very extensive experience in international water law. She's currently the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the journal Water International and is a board member of the IWRA. We have Karen Wilholth. She's the Principal Researcher at the International Water Management Institute, and she's a coordinator of the Groundwater Solutions for Policy and Practice and a founder member of the IAH Commission on Transboundary Aquifers. And she has very extensive experience in transboundary water resources, especially from Southern Africa. We will have Peter Kovac. He's in another meeting. He will join us very shortly, but he's the head of the River Basin and Water Protection Unit at the Hungarian Ministry of the Interior, and he's a vice chair of the UN Economic Commission for Europe Commission at the convention, and he's also the chair of the expert working group, which is currently preparing a water allocations handbook. He has been responsible for implementing over 30 bilateral water agreements with countries and other parts of the world. I'm very pleased to have also Professor Khaled Kuzaman. He's a professor of geology at Lockhaven University. He's the author of several books on water resources, and he has very deep knowledge and understanding of the transboundary Ganges and Brahmaputra River Basin. We're very fortunate also to have Professor Nadir Al-Ansari. He's a professor at Luleå Technical University in Sweden, and he's carried out more than 30 research projects in Iraq, Jordan, UK, and he's also been the former president of the Iraqi Water Resources Society. And last but not least, we have Dr. Hazem Al-Nasser. He's the chairman of the Middle East Water Forum, which is hosting this seminar. Formerly, he was the Minister of Water in Jordan and a member of the Parliament of the Jordanian Parliament. And he's very closely involved in many water management issues, not only in the region, but also around the world. And I'm also delighted to say that I have worked with Dr. Hazem on Jordan water resources from the early 1990s. And so I will turn over to Dr. Hazem now to ask him to set out some of the aims of the webinar and how the discussions may be used to take this issue and give it greater visibility and possibly actions by countries. And just to say that while he's speaking, we will run the first opinion poll. So over to you, Dr. Hazem.
Thank you, Mr. Puri, chairman of the panel. And on behalf of the Middle East Water Forum and co-organizers, I would like to welcome all panelists and participants to this international webinar on the issue of transboundary water resources. As you mentioned, Mr. Puri, today we have almost 390 registered participants from over 32 countries. And I think I am lucky. Once I started talking to you, the number of participants is exactly 100. So I will consider this as a good luck for the success of this webinar. And for that, really, I thank again all participants and panelists for their contribution. As water problem in the Middle East is in no way to be solved within national boundaries and shall be dealt with from a regional perspective, where countries can exchange data, experience, new technologies, which requires integrated efforts in terms of providing the needed knowledge to all Middle Eastern countries without the need to cross political boundaries. Therefore, we came up with the idea of the Middle East Water Forum. The Middle East Water Forum is an online forum that crosses all political boundaries, that crosses all political tensions, that crosses all political overtones over the region. And the forum actually working and serving as a gateway to future collaboration among various water consumers, stakeholders, and research institutes. The Middle East Water Forum is acting as an information hub and networking platform for countries, utilities, companies, and experts to work together toward a regional water security through raising public awareness, dissemination of information, and discussion of regional issues. And today's webinar is among the activities that we do to discuss regional issues, to raise awareness, to educate people and experts in a language that they can understand. Because transboundary in the Middle East is a major issue. And countries on the national level having difficulties to plan long-term for their water and their sustainability issues without fixing the transboundary problems that they have. Considering that when it comes to the Arab region, 65% of the water that flows to the Arab countries coming from outside their political boundaries. So it's so important that we increase awareness and educate people, give them the basic principles on regional cooperation, dialogue, and hydro-diplomacy, which is the aim of this seminar. The forum has more than 2,000 registered experts. Of course, registration is free, and we publish articles, we discuss regional issues, we provide the new technologies, we provide videos about water issues, etc. So, and simply the forum is a hub for water-related issues within the Middle East. And in our information hub, you can find all the information you want about any country in the Middle East. And the aim of this webinar, because, and I was discussing this with the panelists and in particular the chairman, Mr. Puri, that now with the problems that we have in the Middle East, I'm talking now about the political problems. I'm talking about the civil wars that we have. I'm talking about the issue of climate change. So we thought that we want to discuss this issue with the people, although the scope is beyond the Middle East, also including North Africa and South Asia. But we wanted to open the eyes on the importance of the water issues under challenging elements like, as I said, war, political conflict, COVID-19, climate change, etc. But also we want to tell people the full story about transboundary. We want to give them the technical background. We want to give them the legal background. We want to give them the academia opinion and perspective, etc. I was suggesting to my friends from the panel that we want to come up with a small appealing statement to the world and to the government, because we want the normal people on the ground to benefit from our webinars and seminars. We don't want only people sitting at universities or research institutes or international organizations to learn and to gain knowledge about what we are doing. We want people on the ground who are suffering, mainly poor, to have some minimum benefits out of such a webinar. Therefore, by the end of this seminar, if you allow me and you give me the approval, I will try to formulate a draft appealing statement to the world, mainly under the line of not using water as a weapon towards people, and in particular, the poor. So Shami, that's what I have now, and we will continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very good introduction and the intention of trying to produce some kind of a final statement or an appeal. I think that sounds like a very good idea. Let us now start with looking at legal issues. We understand that international water law is critical in the way of transboundary water management. So let me introduce the issue by asking Raya to please, could you outline for us some of the existing global international instruments on transboundary waters, and then to tell us if there are anything specific that's going on in certain regions, for example, in the Arab region.
Okay, thank you, Shami, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Let me share my screen. Okay, where is mine? Okay, I think everyone can now see my my slides. So yes, I mean, I will just quickly give an overview of the existing instruments we have at the international level on shared waters, but also on, let's say, domestic issues regarding water. So on the shared waters, we have two international conventions. The first one was adopted by the UN in 1997. It's in force since 2014, and it has 37 parties. And the second one was originally, the UNECE convention was originally a regional convention for the Europe and the pan-European region. And it has opened wide world for all the UN members in 2013. There are already African states that have joined. And the UN has adopted a resolution with draft articles on the law of transboundary aquifers. These are still in the form of UN General Assembly resolutions, but there have been 4 UN General Assembly resolutions on these draft articles. So these 3 instruments codify the core principles of international water law, which are the equitable and reasonable use and the obligation not to cause significant harm. And they also include other principles which are related to the regular exchange of data, monitoring, management, prevention, control, and reduction of pollution, and preservation of ecosystems. As Dr. Hazem said in his introduction, I'm trying to move, okay, here is the arrow for the next slide. As Dr. Hazem said in his introduction, shared waters is a very important issue in the Arab region. So the Arab Ministerial Water Council, which was established within the League of Arab States, has adopted a resolution in 2016 to prepare guiding principles for cooperation on shared waters. And these guiding principles are still at this stage of draft. It's a work in progress, have adopted and drafted the core principles that I have just mentioned. And they have also included other specific principles which are more related to the realities of the Arab world. The intention of having these guiding principles is to provide the guidance for developing cooperation on shared waters among the Arab states and to ensure water security in shared basins and shared aquifers. And they are also meant, the guiding principles are also meant to provide the basis for specific agreements among the riparian states. Now, if we move on to issues related to domestic waters at the domestic level, I have to mention the UN General Assembly resolution on the human right to water and sanitation, which was adopted in 2010. And this this resolution gave an international recognition to the right to water and sanitation, which translates in providing safe, clean, accessible, and affordable drinking water and sanitation for all. The Sustainable Development Goals have also given a special place for water, since Goal 6 is exclusively is exclusively on water, and its general goal is to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. It includes various targets, and one of them relates to transboundary cooperation. We have to note that there is a very close relationship between the human right to water and sanitation and the Sustainable Development Goals, which are always insisting on the human rights. And last instrument I like to mention here is the international humanitarian law, which deals with the protection of civilians during wars. They are in international humanitarian law was codified in 4 conventions, the 4 Geneva Conventions and additional protocols. And you can see that these instruments have been widely accepted and ratified by the states. And basically, these instruments consider water as a civilian object. So as such, it has to be protected, and it is protected under these bodies of laws. And also not only water itself is protected, but also all water installations, because they are indispensable to the survival of a civilian population. This is what I had to say just as an overview and introduction, and I'll be happy to answer further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Raya. That's very interesting. I'm just wondering if we can ask you, would you say that despite the existing availability of these legal international frameworks, it would seem that without much deeper international cooperation, we may not see a lot of progress? And by the way, welcome to Peter Kovac, who's just joined us.
I mean, it's true when the body of water is shared between states, of course it has to be, I mean, the ideal situation is to manage it within cooperation, and especially on groundwater, because we don't see what's happening. So when you are in state A, you cannot see and what is happening in state B if it's a shared groundwater body. So cooperation is indispensable for sure. States have, and before the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the Millennium Development Goals, and under these goals, states have made some progress on the access to water, but still progress still needs to be made. So even bodies of instruments that relate to domestic water can also provide progress in the let's say access to water for the population.
And then what would you suggest in terms of hydro diplomacy? Is there something in the legal context which allows us to have some form of a legally based hydro diplomacy, or is that something that countries may or may not undertake? How does hydro diplomacy and legal frameworks work?
Well, to my view, I'm a legal person, not a political one, and not a political science. So to my view, the laws are the tool for hydro diplomacy. When the countries, for example, are entering into negotiations, political discussions, etc., if they reach an agreement, their agreement has to be based on international water law. So law is the tool to make hydro diplomacy be successful, let's say.
Yes, I think that was the point that I was trying to make, that you can have hydro diplomacy strengthened by the fact that there is some legal instruments available, and vice versa. The legal instruments are more effective when we engage in hydro diplomacy in a more kind of proactive way. Perhaps we'll come back to that kind of later on during the discussion. We have sent out the first poll. We haven't yet got the results, but they will be coming shortly. And then we'll be sending out the second poll. Oh, yes, we have some results. So the poll was, in your region, are transboundary waters more critical than national water resources? 44% of the respondents have said that it's more critical. 30%, 31% have said it's urgent, but national is more important. That's quite interesting. And then only 25% say it's not critical. So it would seem that among our audience, almost half the audience is saying that transboundary waters are more critical than national, although we can see from the other result, second result, that national are also quite important. And I think from what Raya has just said, there is obviously a good link between national and transboundary water resources. And here again, we see that there is a need to have good legal frameworks, which are accepted and adopted, and as well as good efforts at hydro diplomacy to see that transboundary waters are better managed for this. There will be a second poll coming up. Let me move on to, so this was the background that we had on the legal frameworks. Let us look at the scientific perspective, because obviously for things to be understood properly, we need to have a good understanding of what it is we're dealing with. And in this case, of course, it's science, which provides us the background and provides us with quantitative information. So let me turn to Karen now, Karen Wilhoth. Karen, this is a bit of a controversial question, but maybe you will answer it. Would you agree that today, in 2020, the world's scientists have compiled such a huge mass of knowledge on the basins and aquifers, so that for almost any transboundary basin, we have a reasonable, not accurate, but reasonable idea of the resource and the constraints and the broad actions that need to be taken there. For example, we understand arid zone aquifers, we understand wet river basins. Do you think that there is adequate information, or is scientific information still very much lacking?
Thank you, Shami, for the question, and I'm happy to be part of this webinar, and I really appreciate you taking the initiative to organize it. It's very topical and relevant, and I'm happy to be part of it. I will give you a little bit of an introduction. I don't know if you want me to do that first, Shami, or do we want to jump straight into the questions?
No, go ahead with your introduction.
Okay, let me get it up. I can't see it here for some reason. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can close a lot of stuff here.
While you're doing that, we have the second opinion poll.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the second opinion poll has gone ahead, and we'll wait for the answers. But go ahead, Karen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it up
Good.
now?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shami. So while you do the poll, I can at least start my presentation. So basically, I'm representing the scientific side of things. I have an academic background in hydrogeology and groundwater, so you will see there's a bit of a bias in my presentation in that regard. So sort of the points that I want to touch from the, as you know, the emerging science trend cooperation. And so some of the points that came to mind was that looking at because of that, we need to understand those systems in a joint manner. Also, in many places, groundwater is the only resource, so we need to understand those systems irrespectively. So that's where I think there's a lot of challenges still that we need to face in terms of assessing the resource, in terms of coming up with joint management strategies, in terms of coming up with the technical solutions and so on. Regarding the science and so on, and it's a little bit linked to your question, Shami, but I'll come back to it afterwards also. I think there's insufficient knowledge and data out there, especially related to groundwater. And that is, of course, because groundwater is invisible and it's much more costly and time consuming to get the necessary data. And so it will probably always lag behind, but it's not to say that we shouldn't do it. And I don't think we know enough to answer your question, Shami, but I think maybe there's a bit of a reluctance in a way to invest a lot, because it costs a lot. And also there can be some political issues in terms of, opening up too much in terms of knowledge generation and so on. So it can sometimes maybe be easier to say, okay, we don't know. It can be an excuse for no action in a sense. But it's not to say that we have enough knowledge. I think there's a lot to be done there. And I think it's a long haul. It's not something we can do overnight, especially with groundwater. These processes are very slow and so on. So we need to continue monitoring these resources as we go, even as we develop them. Systems in transition, we all know about climate change, and we know about all the challenges with human development and so on. And all our systems are under pressure due to these transitions, and we need to take that into account. We need to understand climate change and what it's doing to our systems and how to manage that also in these transboundary contexts. There's a lot of institutional capacity gaps in terms of human capacity, institutional capacity, and also in terms of some of these international water legislations and so on, especially when we're talking about these joint systems, because they tend to either focus on surface water or groundwater. And I think we need to maybe, if possible, step back and look at them with new eyes and see, are there ways that we can actually address these joint systems in a more coherent way and maybe redraft some of these instruments that are presently available. Just a few slides, some maps, and then I'll hand over to the questions again. I just made a snapshot here of the Middle East region in terms of transboundary aquifers, and you can see all the brown spots here. They're quite prevalent, especially if you look at like the Arabian Peninsula. There's a lot of aquifers, even though this is a very arid area. There's substantial amounts of oftentimes fresh groundwater, and that's of course what's being developed now, and it's also then becoming a challenge in terms of developing it sustainably, because in many cases, as you can actually see in the next graph here, a lot of these systems are not replenishable, or very slowly and little replenishable. You can see those hatched areas. Those are also large transboundary aquifer systems in the northern Africa, and these do not really coincide with any river basins, which are the purple and orange and so on areas that you can see here. So basically in those areas, the major water resource is fossil groundwater. And so of course, we have to look at these also in a very specific way. Just zooming in on a very sort of concrete transboundary context here, where we're looking at Israel and the neighboring countries, and just pointing out how many places and zones of potential conflict that we have here due to overlapping water resources between the countries. And many of them are linked to either surface water or groundwater or both. I won't go into details, but just to give you that kind of overview if you like to have a look at it later on. So this is coming to my last slides. So we always have to end on a good note, and I'd like to just point to some of the opportunities that we have to look at. And coming back to what I said, we need to look at these systems holistically and integratedly. We need to develop virtuous cycles between sharing data and building trust between nations, and this takes time. And the more you share, the more trust you build, and the more you trust, the more you share. So this is a virtuous cycle we have to keep building on. Identify the best management frameworks for integrated systems. So looking again at the available instruments that are out there. Visualize, develop, manage, protect, revitalize degraded groundwater systems. As we get more and more dependent on groundwater, we really have to get to grips with how to deal with these systems and keeping them sustainable. I'll give a few examples in my last two slides of how this can be done. and then work with climate, not against it. And the examples that I'm giving are also sort of emphasizing that aspect to it. And then finally, work across sectors, identify integrated solutions, improve governance. Governance is really critical, and especially with groundwater, as I already said. I mean, we can't see it. We need to really get to grips with it and talk about it and visualize it and understand it. And then partnerships and capacity building. I think that was also mentioned by Hasim with the Middle East Water Forum. I'm also leading a global partnership on groundwater. It's called GRIP, Groundwater Solutions Initiative for Policy and Practice. And we would very much like to work with the Middle East Water Forum, you know, going forward on groundwater aspects. We're working on transboundary issues, but not only, but also at, you know, some of these solutions that can be brought into place for groundwater. So my last two slides, this is from Abu Dhabi, an example of where they are injecting desalinated seawater into inland aquifers to keep them as an emergency reserve in case of trouble. And they're using excess energy from their huge resources of energy that they're not using during the night or when there's a low demand. And so they can use that for desalinating water and then storing it for later use. Another example here is from the Shafdan in Israel, where they are using treated wastewater and injecting that into aquifers and making sure the quality is good quality for that and living up to the standard so that it can be reused for crop production for humans. And these are examples that we have visualized and compiled on the GRIP website if you like to have a look at it. So I think I'll stop there, Shami, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. That was very interesting. So my kind of takeaway message from that was that we know a lot, but perhaps we do not know enough. I think that's what you may have said. But then looking through the wealth of information that you presented, you know, if I was not a scientist, I would be a bit puzzled at continually wanting more information and perhaps holding back the policymakers from being able to come to a decision. One other point that you made, which I would like to just follow up on, was you kind of hinted that perhaps the international legal frameworks may not be suitable or may not be science-based. Perhaps that's not what you meant, but could you just kind of elaborate a little on that, the link between international water regulations, laws, and the scientific applications of those principles? Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sami, thank you very much. I think you actually sort of alluded to two questions. So the first one was on this issue of data generations, which could hamper any development because it takes time to collect all of that information. And so I truly see your point, but I think also what we see is happening around the world is that groundwater is actually being quite extensively developed. Despite maybe sufficient information, but also the fact that groundwater data is in fact being developed or generated as part of the development process itself. So in a sense, some of these things can go hand in hand, and you definitely need to follow up also, you know, on the longer term impact assessments so that you know that you're going down the right path and you're not going into something which is totally unsustainable in terms of water quantity or quality. So I'm advocating for more data, definitely, but I'm also advocating for you know, a sustainable development that does need some level of information. Yeah, and your other question related to the legal instruments. I think there are some things that we could be looking more into in terms of, for instance, the specific characteristics that we have for surface water and groundwater systems, and even for, if you like, wastewater and desalinated water and so on, which, you know, with time will have a larger role to play just because of the mass of it and because of the need for it. So we need to look at these integrated water systems. But in terms of surface water and groundwater is quite peculiar in terms of being very slow, and once it's polluted and so on, we cannot easily turn it back to a clean state. So these precautionary principles and so on, they may not be so well reflected in the surface water legal instruments and so on. So I think there's a need to look at where we need to emphasize those particular aspects that are related to each resource and sort of harmonize that. I think that's my point, and maybe there's a need to do that. I would be happy to be part of such a process together with other people. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Just to push you a little bit more.
Yes, go ahead.
Here's another question. Among the points that you made, you stressed the need for more data, more investment, more information, etc., etc. Much of this will only come if the policymakers understand the problem and make human, technical, financial, and other resources available. Now, how would you comment if somebody said that the world's hydrologists, hydrogeologists, water engineers kind of seem to be working in a kind of a bubble, and vice versa, the world's policymakers are driven by some completely different factors. For example, they're driven by, for the international relations, they're driven by trade, by manufacturing, by food security, and so on. How can we make these two bubbles, if they are these two bubbles, how can we make these two bubbles to kind of interact with each other more effectively?
Yeah, thank you, Shami. Yeah, there is certainly some disconnect between, the spheres that we work in as scientists and the policymakers, and we probably have, new ways of thinking to do both in both parties. From the scientists, I think we have to be much better at communicating our science and our data and our information to the policymakers, so that that information becomes relevant to them in their particular context, in the particular cases that they're dealing with, and so on. And we need to look at these things more holistically, not only from a surface water, groundwater, or indeed from a water perspective, but also from economy, socio-economy, food security, and all these things, because that's kind of the context that the policymakers are sitting in. So if they don't see what we bring to the table as being relevant to them, they're not going to listen. And I think we have a big task to do there. I'm not saying that we are there, or we're that I'm good at it, but I think it's something that definitely we need to think more about. And on the other hand, I think also the policymakers need to probably be better at understanding what are the implications of making decisions that are not based on facts and figures, and understanding the benefit of bringing that into their decision making. I don't know what their motives are, except for the fact that they need to look at these aspects in the long term, and oftentimes decisions are made on a short term. And what we like to do as scientists is always to look at the longer term. So somehow we need to make them understand that the long-term perspectives are also very relevant. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. We have the results of the second poll, and the question was, what is most relevant to improve sound governance of transboundary water resources? And 31% respond by saying hydrodiplomacy, 11% respond by saying signing on to the UN Global Water Conventions, and 57% think bilateral or multilateral cooperation is more relevant. So that's a very interesting finding, that it would seem that the International Water Conventions are perhaps not going to give us the kind of results that we're looking for, but much more hydrodiplomacy at the bilateral levels between countries and multilateral levels based on sound hydrodiplomatic relations. Maybe that's an interesting thing for us to kind of come back to and discuss later on. I don't know if Peter, yes, Peter's there. Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. Can I then now turn to Peter Kovac, who I introduced earlier on. Peter, can I ask you to tell us how the UN ECE Convention fits into the other UN Global Water Conventions, And then to ask you the question, is it applicable to the regions outside the ECE, which is Europe, Eurasia, and North America?
Yes, thank you, Shami, very much. I think I'm just returning time because I'm in another meeting as well related with the UNEC water allocation issues. So I prepared a very short presentation and I hope I can share it with you. Please let me know if you can see it. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Yes, so I have to start it. So thank you very much. In my short presentation, I will talk about the transboundary water cooperation in the point of view of Hungary as a country and also as a member of the ICPDR, the Danube Convention, and also related with the UNEC Water Convention. So as you see the geographical location of Hungary, you see that we are in the bottom of the basin and we are a big transit country related with water. And we are surrounded with high mountains. So the water is discharged into our territory. So for us, international cooperation, it's just a matter of existence. You see, we have 24 rivers entering into the country and only 3 is leaving us. So for 6 neighbors, we are upstream, we are downstream country, and only for 1 neighbor, we are the upstream. But we can experience the benefits of both positions. What does it mean for us, the water? And the water, the abundance of the water or the less or absence of water is also very characteristic for the country. You see the bridge, one photo is taken in April and the second is in May in the same year. So you can see what are the major problems now with water in Hungary. That is why we are very active in international cooperation. So we have bilateral cooperation with the neighboring countries. We are part of the many multilateral cooperation. And also we are a member state, so we have to comply with the European legislation. And also we also active on the global water cooperation. We have, luckily, with all the neighbors, transboundary river commissions based on agreements, which has already long history. And we are dealing with those problems like flood management, hydrological forecast, data exchange, quality problems, management, and also many other sub-topics under the discussion. We are also part of the Danube River Convention, which also had a history already. It was signed by 1994 in Sofia, 29th of June. And the ICPDR is coordinating the basin-wide implementation of the EU Water Framework Directive and also of the Flood Directive. It might be interesting to see the picture of the coordination mechanism. So the ICPDR is in direct contact with many of the countries. The basin is shared by 19 countries, and 5 of them has less than 2,000 square kilometers, so they are not signatories of the convention, but they are also participating through the bilateral cooperation in the work of the ICPDR somehow. And it's very important also to see that we are working on, let's say, on an expert group base. So the countries are nominating experts and decisions are made by the delegations and the secretariat is executing the decisions. And it's very important to highlight that we have a very shared or a very broad cooperation with stakeholders as well, who are the observers, but they can express their opinion related with all decisions and tasks. And you see that Danube is very diverse. It's also connecting one of the richest countries in Europe with one of the poorest countries. And you see also the landscape is changing quite dramatically during the long way of the river entering into the sea. Just a few words about the UNEC Water Convention, where my country also very active. I'm also still a vice chair of the convention. We used to have a presidential chairmanship some years ago. And it was the time when the UNEC Water Convention became a global instrument. So, and it is a legal framework based on cooperation principles. You already had some information about the New York Convention, and we are saying that those are complementary. They can, let's say, improve even the implementation if we are looking forward both of them. One is more practically orientated and the other is more stronger in the legal views. And this is also an institutional framework for the countries who are participating, and also gives a lot of support for the members and non-members as well. So it became a global instrument. So all UN member states can accede to the convention since 2016. And now we have already 44 parties. 3 countries outside of the region already joined to the convention. The first was Chad, the second Senegal, and Ghana just recently. And beyond the UNEC Water Convention, we have a protocol on water and health, which might be also a really useful tool for the countries. And as you see, we are, let's say, starting to become global. So we have 44 parties, and we have a lot of interest from almost each continent. And I think it's really good sign for us. We have a very well-developed work plan, and it will be renewed next year, also during the meeting of the parties. And I just want to highlight 3 activities which are in the work plan as well. One is the handbook on water allocation in the transboundary context. It might be very interesting for the Middle East countries as well, how to share water resources over the borders. And the other similar activity is the checklist of the development of legal frameworks for transboundary cooperation. One of the major objectives of the Water Convention to help the countries to develop working relationship on the transboundary waters. And this checklist, it will be a tool also to just select what are the most appropriate elements of the transboundary cooperation for the countries or for the regions. And I think it's also important to mention that we have a reporting obligation for the SDG 6.5.2, which is on the transboundary cooperation. And many countries already sent back their answers to their questionnaire. It is a second time of reporting. And it also can help for the countries just to access or review and stock take their activities related transboundary water cooperation. So that is my short, let's say, presentation, and it will be available on the website later. So I'm open for your questions, and please feel free if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. That was a very interesting summary and overview of the UNEC Convention, and also kind of helps us to better understand how the convention, with a very well-established secretariat, is able to help and work with their member states and countries that join up. Let me pick up on one point in which you might be able to give us some advice, particularly as you're chairing this working group on the handbook of water allocation. And in connection with many river basins, Tigris, Euphrates on the one hand, Ganges, Brahmaputra, and many others, the water resources in these basins, and Danube to some extent, the water resources in these basins are already committed to irrigation, agriculture, power generation, et cetera, and sometimes they are allocated, perhaps over-allocated. And in this situation, how do you think that the handbook would help these countries to try to maybe renegotiate, maybe reallocate their water resources, bearing in mind that it's going to be difficult because countries that have already made their investments are not too keen to reduce their water share? What is the perspective that you could bring, particularly looking at the experience from many, many years from the Danube Basin?
Yes, thank you for the question. And it's very complicated to answer to such a question, but I will try my best. So as you see, during my presentation, we have a double role in water management. We are downstream for most of the neighbors and upstream for one of the neighbors to Serbia. So we are, it's very understandable for us what are the requests from a downstream and upstream countries direction. And everybody wants to use more and more water. This is our experience. And also due to the climate change effects, there is a tendency also in the Danube Basin that people are using more water for irrigation in the agriculture as well. And usually the water demand is higher during the low water period of times. So it's really important how we can store the water and also how we can provide water for the downstream countries as well. It might be a really difficult question and it has a lot of political implications as well. That is why we are decided to lead a process to develop a handbook. We would like to collect all the existing practice, not only in Europe, but all over the world, how the countries are sharing the resources, how they practicing the sharing of the water resources. It will be not a compulsory handbook, but it will be a possibility for the countries to use the existing practice. And as like in the restaurant, as a la carte, we just want to offer some solutions, how the countries been successfully dealing with such problems. I know it's very relevant for the Middle East countries because of the lack of the water resources and the problems between also on a political means. And it will be a very long process, but we wanted to produce something which might help to the countries. Of course, everything will depend on the willingness of the countries. And UNEC Water Convention also gives a platform to the countries to discuss, to share their views. And I think also that one of the base of the real cooperation could be a legal framework to establish. And if we are touching sensitive issues, it might be more difficult to even to develop a river commission or even a bilateral cooperation agreement. And in the Danube Basin, we are not really have problem at this moment with the water quantity and quality either. But as you see, the distribution of water, especially the rainwater in space and time, is very changeable. And now it may be the effect of the climate change. We are experiencing much more intensive rainfall in one spot, which is causing even a flash flood, which is also very dangerous for population as well, and also not very good in the water management of point of view. You cannot store so much water in once. So we also providing some solution also for our water managers, how to keep back the water from the wet period of time to the dry period of time. It's not easy because, especially in the European region, we have no space to build up big reservoirs. So we have to use also other solutions just to keep water back with a good agricultural practice to store in the soil or whatever tools we can apply. So I think we can share a lot of experience as a country, just being a transit country, how we can negotiate with our upstream and downstream neighbors as well related on that issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. We'll see how the experience in Ganges, Brahmaputra and Tigris Euphrates comes in shortly. But I have the third poll. The third poll is up at the moment. And the third poll says, if the impact of COVID, seem to have lost it, if the impact of the COVID means less economic growth in the next 5 years, which translates into a lower GDP, will the attention to cooperation over transboundary water resources change? And we have 43% say that there will be much more attention. So that's very interesting. 35% say that there will be much less attention. Again, very interesting. 15% say there'll be no change, and 6% say there'll be no impact. So it looks as though in the next 5 or so years, there will be perhaps quite a lot more attention to transboundary waters, but maybe not so much. I'm not sure how this is classified according to regions from our audience, which now had numbers 124 people. So the 124 people feel that 43% of them feel that there will be a need. I'm not sure whether they feel there's a need or there will be attention to transboundary issues, but 36% think there'll be a lot less interest, and 15% say there's going to be no change. But almost everybody thinks that there will be an impact of COVID. So that's a very salutary kind of lesson for us to take forward to try and understand what happens in the next 4 or 5 years. Let me just move on now and go east from the Danube Basin into Asia and Southern Asia, and one of the major river basins of the world.
Sammy, may I have
Yes.
one final?
Yes. Yes.
I just want to highlight it. I just forget to mention that how you can benefit also from the work of the ICPDR or the Water Convention. So luckily, we are sharing the Danube Basin with many countries, and we are speaking at least 12 different languages. So that is why we selected the English as a main communication tool, and all material, all the guidance are available on English, which might be really useful for the rest of the world as well. And what is related with the UNEC Water Convention, we have 3 official languages, English, French, and Russian. But due to the interest from the rest of the world, in many cases, we are introducing and providing simultaneous translation during the meeting on Arabic and on Spanish language as well. And many of the guidance documents also available on those languages. Just, I wanted to let you know that you can go freely to the website of both organizations and to browse the content very easily. Thank you very much. And sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me move to Professor Karakuzaman. Can you give us an overview of the river basin? How large is it? How many countries share it? Are the resources considered to be abundant or scarce? Kind of an overview of what the river basin of the Ganges Brahmaputra is like.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to such a learned audience, and thanks Dr. Al Nasser and Shami for inviting me. It's what a nice panel of people. I'm learning a lot from this, so thank you for that. So let me share my screen. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, but not necessarily I'll go through every single slide and spend time. I'll probably browse through them in case there are questions, and then probably we can come back to those. So I just kind of over-prepared. This very common characteristics of professors, they over-prepare. So as you know, so we'll see how it goes. So I'm sharing my screen, and I am going to, can you see the screen right now?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Let's see here. It's taking a minute, seems like. While it's loading, I'm going to focus on the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna Basin, which is in South Asia. This is one of the largest basins in the world, and as you will see in a second. So, outline of my presentation is, as Shami just mentioned, how big it is, which countries are involved, and probably I'll just touch on the current status of the cooperation. But I'll say upfront that mainly somewhere between unilateralism to bilateralism is the mode of operandi right now. Not really integrated water resources management involving all the countries. And I'll mention in a second what those countries are. So since the countries are going on a more of a bilateral and unilateral mode, so each of the countries have their own projects. And those projects are not necessarily kind of like, honor the basin scale dynamism. So, and I'll try to give a way forward from there, what needs to happen. So here is the map. And as you can see, there are three major basins. Ganges shown in blue here, and that's a very large basin, more than 1 million kilometer square area that's shown in blue here, shared between Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. And then shown in gray here is the Brahmaputra basin, which is shared between China, Bhutan, India, and Bangladesh. And the Meghna basins, which is shared between mainly between India and Bangladesh. Between these three basins, in short, we call them GBM basins, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna. So there are, as I mentioned, all these countries are involved, mainly 5 countries, India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. Approximately 10% of the world population, give or take 700 million people live in these basins. So we are talking about a completely gigantic size and of the basin. By the way, all these major rivers, Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna, originate from outside and enters Bangladesh, all 3 of them. And within the Bangladesh, only 8% of the basin area belongs to the country of Bangladesh. So 92% is outside. So they are heavily dependent on the upstream neighbors. And for reference, I'm putting here 3 very contested projects. One is Farakka Barrage on the Ganges in India. That's put there to divert water to their port of Kolkata, which is a major city. And there is one treaty. So by the way, there are 54 total rivers that enter Bangladesh. 3 of them are Ganges, Meghna, Brahmaputra. So there are other 51 rivers, but there is only one treaty currently on the Ganges about the water sharing at the Farakka barrage point. How much water is going to go to Bangladesh and how much is going to go to other parts of India. So together between GBM basin, the size is more than 1.5 million square kilometers. For reference, this 800,000 square kilometer was the size of the Danube basin. So that is quite large. GBM basin is quite large. These are just the details of these 3 rivers in Bangladesh. Challenges, obviously, there are a lot of challenges of water. Shami already mentioned, if the upstream countries, in this case, India is the largest country, they have their own share of issues, own share of problems. Scarcity of the water during certain season. When it comes to GBM basin, main problem is the seasonality. 90% of the rainfall during the June to September, and 10% falls throughout the entire year. And the main scarcity occurs between January and May. And the water sharing treaty that we have currently with India and Bangladesh is to share the water at Farakka Point between January and May. So bilateralism. So here is the Farakka barrage, just to show you. So it's not only the water issue, I'm a geologist, it's also the sediment issue. All these dams and barrages in upstream region, they trap the sediment, and that doesn't reach the same amount of sediment used to the Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is a delta country. As a result of this, in the face of sea level rise, a country is facing tremendous challenge to keep pace with the sea level rise, meaning to grow against the sea level rise. And also there is the mangrove forest called Sundarbans in Bangladesh. Also part of it is in India, which is a World Heritage Site, and that's facing tremendous challenge in the face of sea level rise. So here is the Ganges Treaty's results. Just to show, this is what the red line showing how much water Bangladesh was to receive since 1996. The treaty came in effect, but you can see many of the times, actually 55% of the time, Bangladesh did not receive her fair share. So these are the lines for the years below that red line. So treaty is in place, but it's not implemented properly. And there are other barrages on Tista River, which is the 4th largest river. So you can see that there is no treaty on the Tista River. And then before the barrage in India, that was the average water flow that used to come to Bangladesh in 200 cubic meter per second. And after the barrage, you can see it took a nosedive, and now it is down to really like 50 cubic. So national projects, Bangladesh is doing its own stuff, putting the polder and embankments to save the country against the sea level rise. As a geologist, I don't think these are the right concept, but this is a separate issue. And India is doing its own stuff. As you can see, there are a lot of dams, hydroelectric dams in India. These are unilateral projects, not in consultation with the downstream Bangladesh. So just to show, there are 16 constructed, 7 already under construction, and 10 proposed. So these are all unilateral projects, and this is other status of the dams in India. So these are not in any way part of the multilateral cooperation. And these are 54 rivers, as I mentioned, 48 out of 54 before they enter Bangladesh, there are intervention in India, because not from animosity viewpoint, because they need water. So they put diversionary structure within India before they enter in Bangladesh and remove the water for irrigation predominantly. Irrigation obviously takes about 70% of the water use in the world, and also in India and Bangladesh is slightly more than the world average. So here is another proposed big project, unilateral project is India, called Inter-Basin Water Transfer. India is proposing with 32 link channels. They are not in place yet, but the proposal to take water from what they consider surplus basins, such as Brahmaputra, and moving the water through those channels into the southern state of India, in the western state, where they view as the deficit areas in terms of water. From geologic perspective, from ecological perspective, there is no such thing as surplus water, because water has its own functions and ecosystem services that water does, such as the delta building, as I mentioned, and supporting the agriculture and ecosystem and all these. So all these are unilateral, by the way. And so that's what is happening. And some modeling other people did, if those interlinking projects come in place, then obviously water availability in downstream Bangladesh will reduce even further. And if sea level rises by 1 meter, this is the current shoreline in Bangladesh. This half a meter sea level rise, Bangladesh is a very flat country, and sea level will invade inside the country, as you can see the first black line. And if sea level rises by 2 meters, which is within the ICCP projection, then the shoreline configuration will look like this. It will be about 17% of the country in Bangladesh will be uninhabitable at that point. 20 million people will become environmental refugees. So that is a serious problem. It's a ground zero in terms of climate change and sea level rise. So way forward, what should we do? What can we do? I'm really going fast to honor the time, and we can come back to it through questions. I think currently there exist several bilateral treaties or memorandum of understanding between India and Nepal, India and Bhutan, India and Pakistan. Pakistan, by the way, is not part of GBM Basin, but I'm just saying. And India and Bangladesh, there is one treaty, the Ganges Treaty of 96. It is not just water sharing in my mind, but more of a integrated holistic compact involving all aspects of water, soil, sediment, and land use, and groundwater, surface water management is needed in my mind. That's what I'm saying, way forward, what needs to happen. we should not forget that ecosystem and environmental flow should be a party in future treaties and future negotiation. Some people, some scientists are suggesting could Koshi River, which is one of the major tributary to the Ganges and Faraka barrages here in India, whether there should be, Peter already mentioned how we need to increase the storage, during the rainy season. So these are a proposal in the Koshi Basin. There are 7 storage, JICA, Japan did a study, and they are proposing that maybe there should be some storage areas built within the Koshi, meaning in Nepal, so that it will have a multiple uses of the water, not just for the irrigation. Same water can be used for various purposes, such as for hydroelectricity, and then irrigation in the downstream region in Nepal and India. You can see those areas. And then also augment the water flow during the lean season at Faraka barrage, so that Bangladesh gets their fair share. So you can see multiple uses of water needs involving multiple parties, meaning entire GBM basin in my mind. Ganges Brahmaputra basin, maybe more modeled after Danube basin or maybe Rhine basin. That is what needs to happen. So role models for collaboration, I think the Rhine basin has a good model. Danube basin, Peter just presented. Nile basin, Lower Mekong basin, Indus basin. India and Pakistan has, as you know, not very politically strained relation. Even then, their Indus treaty, signed in 1960, is going without any hurdle. So same kind of that's a bilateral treaty, by the way. But when it comes to GBM basin, then we need many countries involved, like even China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India needs to come up with a holistic basin scale model so that we are not doing this thing bilaterally. You can ask why, because bilateralism is not really taking interest of the all stakeholder in the basin, and it is not really working very well so far. So Ganges Treaty, at least we have a treaty with India, and that's a good start in my mind. It helps to build the trust. And by the way, Bangladesh, India has historically very friendly relationship. I think that is the most friendliest relationship among India's surroundings neighbors with the Bangladesh. But the water relations, it's strained to say the least, and that needs to, so challenges is why multilateralism is not occurring. In my mind, unequal power dynamics. India is a huge power there, and they want to deal with it bilaterally, country by country. And also, I think Karen had a very good point that science and policy maker spheres are somewhat disconnected. Scientific understandings are there, even for us, for GBM basin, for scientists, that it needs to happen at a basin scale for everyone's good, but it's not happening because of the unequal power dynamics. India's unwillingness to multilateralism, they are willing to do bilaterally things. Bangladesh geographical constraint and their weaknesses in negotiation of hydro diplomacy, in my mind, because Bangladesh has a lot of diplomacy with India. I think they could promote hydro diplomacy in the exchange of water with India, and demanding that India enters a more of a multilateral, GBM basin model, so that Bangladesh is available to India for other collaboration. So proper implementation of the Ganges Treaty is also needed. So we can go for win-win and healthy ecosystem and green energy, as I mentioned. So promote integrity. What should be the center of dialogue? We can promote the GBM basin, science-based solution, and SDGs, especially 1, 2, 3, 6. These are the poverty and hunger, and 6 already mentioned, water and sanitation. 7 is clean energy through hydro energy. 13 is climate change. 14 is life above land and ocean. And 16 is institution. 17 is partnership. So in light of those, we need to work towards a common goal. We can bring this from conflict to collaboration. So I'll stop here. Yeah, maybe World Bank and all these other countries, Norway and Australia, who have projects in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, they can help So let's stop here. Thank you very much. And I'll just stop right here.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that interesting presentation. We're running a little bit short of time, so let me just ask one quick question. You mentioned the Danube several times.
Yes.
You also mentioned the sort of intention for rather bilateral approaches. The cost for running the Danube Commission annually is about 1 million euros. That's the cost to run the commission. Do you think that the countries that are members of the Ganges-Brahmaputra would contribute to paying for such a commission, totally
Well,
up to about 1 million euros?
Thank you very much. That's a very nice question, obviously, and that's a political question. That's for a scientist like me, is not in position to make that commitment or decision. But if we consider what is at stake, what are the potential of the energy and regional peace, and so many countries involved, then I think that those countries definitely, I don't know the exact price tag there. In the context of GBM, that price might be different because cost is different there, labor cost and maintenance cost. It may not be 1 million euro, but might be somewhat in that range. But that's for those countries to make, but I think it's a worthwhile investment in my mind.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to our next presentation, and this is the Tigris-Euphrates, strategically placed midway between the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Danube across the world. So let me ask Dr. Ansari again to give us an overview of the river basin, the key issues. Is it overused? Is it abundant? What are the key issues in the Tigris-Euphrates?
Right. Thank you very much, and thank to Dr. Hazem for inviting me to take part in this event. I'll give some sort of a short presentation about this problem, and you can ask me questions later. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. To start with, the Middle East is considered as, as an arid, semi-arid area where the mean annual rainfall doesn't exceed 166 millimeters per year. And most of the countries in this region, they suffer from water shortage problem. Apart from Iraq, due to the presence of Tigris and Euphrates, but problems of water shortage in Iraq started after the 70s due to two main reasons. One of them is building of hydrological projects in riparian countries. And the second thing is climate change. And this is just to show you the location of Iraq. It covers an area of 320,000 square kilometers. Population of Iraq is about 40 million. And the countries sharing the Tigris and Euphrates catchments are 5 countries, as you can see in this table, and the percentage of the catchment in each of these countries. The main thing here is Turkey and Iran, because the Tigris and Euphrates, they rise from southeast Turkey, and most of the tributaries of the Tigris, they come from Iran. So whenever you look at catchment areas of rivers, you will see that one country is dominating the scene. And in this case, it's Turkey, because the two rivers rise from Turkey. If we look at the water inflow to Iraq, in fact, most of the water comes from Turkey, 71%, followed by Iran, 6%, and then Syria, 4%, and a small portion is generated inside Iraq. If we look at the flow of the Tigris, it used to be the high or sufficient. In fact, it was about 1,207 cubic meters per second in Baghdad, and this number represents the flow of the Tigris and its tributaries. But later on, it started to decrease, and the present discharge at Baghdad, it's about 522 cubic meters per second. And you can see in this graph, the dotted black line in the lower part of the graph shows the flow of the Tigris nowadays. The same thing applies for the Euphrates River. And the Euphrates, the average annual flow, it used to be about 30 billion cubic meters per year, sorry. But now it's not more than 4.4 billion cubic meters per year. So according to these figures, then we have plenty of drought spreading within Iraq and the area. And what was used to be called the Fertile Crescent started to die, in fact, about 32 years ago. And if we look at the causes of the conflict between Iraq and other riparian countries in the catchment area of the Tigris and Euphrates, we can put 10 variables. I'll talk shortly about each one of them. The first one is water scarcity. As I said, in fact, the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates was good enough before the 70s. The flow of the Tigris was about 21 billion cubic meters, and the tributaries of the Tigris, they used to supply about 24 billion cubic meters, while there were side valleys on the border between Iraq and Iran. They used to supply 7 to 10 billion cubic meters. So always Turkey claims that the share per capita for Iraq is good enough, but it was good enough till the 70s. But now if we look at the figures, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's decreasing with time. So the share per capita is not good enough. The second variable which affects this problem is climate change. As far as climate change is concerned, all the research indicates that there will be a decrease in rainfall. And the decrease in rainfall, it's expected to be between 15 to 25% all over the catchment area of the Tigris and Euphrates. And the consequence will be a decrease of the flow between about 25 to 73%. And of course, again, these figures will affect the groundwater resources within the region. And apart from this, there will be, of course, more dust storms, and there will be sea level rise as far as Iraq is concerned, and the Gulf sea level there. If the situation remains the same, then it will cover the southern part of Iraq, and it might reach the southern parts of the capital city, Baghdad. Another thing which is very dangerous about climate change, although the rainfall is decreasing with time, but there will be some years where you have intensive rainfall in short duration of time. This happened 2 years ago in Iraq, and the consequence was plenty of floods, and these floods affected hundreds of square kilometers of agricultural areas and wiped some of the small villages. As far as hydrological projects are concerned, in fact, Iran, they have built about 12 dams on the tributaries of the Tigris, and in addition, they have diverted all the valleys I was talking about, supplying about 7 to 10 billion cubic meters of water to Iraq. They have diverted the flow of these valleys inside Iran, as well as the diversion of some of the tributaries like Karun. Karun River is a tributary to what's called Shatt al-Arab. When the Tigris and Euphrates, they meet in the southern part of Iraq, they form what's called Shatt al-Arab, and the Karun supplies 50% of the discharge of Shatt al-Arab. Now, it's all diverted inside Iran. And in addition, in fact, nowadays, they are discharging wastewater through that valley to Shatt al-Arab. And this caused plenty of pollution to Shatt al-Arab water. And now the sea level in the Gulf is rising to or reaching places never reached before, causing, of course, salinity and soil salinity as well. As far as Turkey is concerned, Turkey, they have a big project which is called the GAP project. And this GAP project consists of 22 dams and 19 power stations, hydroelectric power stations. Of course, they started to implement or execute some of these dams, and the overall storage capacity of these dams is about 100 billion cubic meters. And if we look at the needs of Turkey from water, it doesn't exceed 16 billion cubic meters. So you can imagine the difference between the storage capacity of this project and their needs and demands. And in fact, the goals of this project is not only power generation and irrigation, it has other goals as well, strategic goals. One of them, they want to trade excess water with neighboring countries suffering from shortage of water. And the other one is to change the demography of the area where this project is going to be implemented, which is, as I said, southeast Turkey. This area is mainly populated by Kurds, and they are traditionally against the central government. So by implementing these projects, there will be plenty of villages will be flooded, and then the people, they have to move to other places, changing the demography. The other variable is population growth rate. Population growth rate is very high, or relatively very high, within the Tigris and Euphrates catchment, and it's about 3 point something in Syria, followed by Iraq, and then Turkey and Iran. And of course, population growth rate with this figures means more water demand for future. The other variable is energy issue. And Turkey is trying through its GAP project to produce 40% of the energy they are consuming. And if they implement this project, then they don't have to import about 28 million tons of oil and gas for their energy use. And of course, you have heard the past 2 months, the friction between Turkey and Greece about prospecting for new oil reserves or gas reserves in Eastern Mediterranean. So this issue is very important for Turkey. And then we have water mismanagement. In fact, all the countries within the Tigris and Euphrates basin, they are using very old techniques of irrigation, flood irrigation. And this was used since Sumerian times, about 6,000 years ago. And using flood irrigation, you will have plenty of water loss. So the other variable is economic changes, and economic changes due to the increase of the prices of oil in the past decade. In fact, this made plenty of people living in rural rural parts of Iraq and Turkey, Iran, Syria, to move to big towns. And this will increase the water consumption per capita by 10 to 12 folds. And that means, of course, more demand for water. The other variable is expansion of projects and technology. And in this context, I mean expansion of technology in establishing, let's say, companies building dams in Turkey and, of course, Iran. The existing dams, when you build dams, okay, they are good for water use, but you should expect that there will be losses of water due to evaporation from the reservoirs of these dams. And as far as the existing dams are concerned, the loss of water by evaporation from these dams amounts to about 7 or 8 billion cubic meters per year. And then we have another thing is political issues. And if you go to the history of the Middle East, it was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, so no problems were involved. Then it was ruled by French and British forces. Again, nothing was happening that much. And after the designation of political borders, each country tries to attain self-sufficiency of water. And that's why water resources became a cause for friction and tension and even war. Drake 2007 gave some examples of war for water resources mainly, although it's not publicized, but when you look at the intentions and the goals, you will find out that's mainly for water resources. So 1967, 1973, and the conflict in South Lebanon in the 80s, Drake says it's mainly for water resources. And then the friction between Iraq and Syria in 1974, and also between Turkey and Syria in 1987, the first Gulf War between Iraq and Iran, it was all because of water resources problems. And for this reason, you can go back and see what the UN Secretary General stated in 1985, where he said that the next war in the Middle East will be not political, it will be about water shortage problem. And then if we look at the international water law, we'll notice that the law which was issued by the UN in 8th of July 1997, in fact, 3 countries voted against this law, and they are China, Burundi, and Turkey. So, in fact, Turkey doesn't recognize this. And despite the existence of this law, there are no obligations, according to this law, for countries to share their water resources. And another important factor is public awareness. And if we look at the countries concerned within the Tigris and Euphrates basin, none of them has public awareness program to, let's say, educate people about water saving and these sort of things. And if we want to have a solution for the problem concerning Iraq, I think Iraq should work on 2 levels. One, on regional and international level, and try to reach an agreement with Turkey and Iran. Of course, if you go to history, Iraq tried to do this with Turkey and Iran for the past 50 years, and they reached to nothing, in fact, because water resources, as I said, in fact, they rise the Tigris and Euphrates in Turkey, and the tributaries, most of them from Iran. So why they should give Iraq their need of water? But I think the agreement should be integrated. What I mean by integrated, it should be military, security, trade, economics, and water, because there are plenty of opposition or factions opposing Turkey and Iran located in Iraq, and this is very important for their security. In addition, Iraq imports billions of dollars of goods from Iran, sorry, and Turkey, and there are hundreds of companies from Turkey and Iran working in Iraq. And In addition to this, we need to have a third party who can guarantee such an agreement. And this third party should fulfill three more important characteristics. One of them, it should be of high political or international political influence. It should have high technical and financial ability, so that there will be intensive for the parties concerned to use the third party. So the third party can loan money to the individual concerned, or help them technologically to improve or implement some of their projects, so that everybody will think that he is going to gain by signing such an agreement and take it very seriously. On national level, whether Iraq agrees or reach an agreement with Iran or Turkey, they have to do a national strategic long-term planning. And this involves, as I said, trying to reach an agreement with the riparian countries. They have to do rehabilitation of the infrastructures of all hydrological projects and improve their efficiency, because they were neglected since the UN sanctions on Iraq in 1991. And then they have to change the methods of irrigation. They have to use more suitable methods like drip irrigation and sprinkler irrigation. And then they have to set a public awareness program, not only for the people concerned, but also this involves decision makers and politicians, because their decisions might affect the water resources situation. And Iraq, they have to move to what's called non-conventional water resources, using wastewater treatment and reuse and water harvesting. And then there should be some sort of human resources development and training, so that engineers and farmers will be up to date with the new technologies, because using new technologies, this was done by Syria, and the result was they lost 50% of their agricultural project. And UN report says that plenty of farmers became easy target to be recruited by terrorist organizations. This is just very short review of the situation in Tigris and Euphrates.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just want to move on so that we can have a bit of a discussion. I think the key things we learned from both the Ganges-Brahmaputra and from the Tigris-Euphrates, kind of in contrast with the Danube, is that the situation is much more complex in these countries. It's not very straightforward. The role of hydrodiplomacy may be very relevant, and also there is probably a very strong need for a major economic investment before any of these things can happen. If you could stop sharing your screen, we can go to the main screen. Then, can I now ask Dr. Hazem to try and pull together some of these various different strings that we have seen. We have the understanding of international water law and what its obligations are. We've understood how science may help us to understand these issues in river basins and water balances and so on. We've got an understanding from 3 river basins. We know that in one, the Danube Basin Corporation is working very well. We know that to some extent bilateral agreements work in the Ganges-Brahmaputra, and we see that in the Tigris-Euphrates, perhaps they're not there. What is your take on this, Hazem? Where do we go from here? And while you're speaking, we'll also have the 4th opinion poll. So please go ahead, Hazem.
Well, thank you, Shami, again. As we heard from the distinguished experts, you can easily distinguish between different regions and different models. The Middle East, as being the most scarce water region in the world, having more challenges and more trouble in terms of cooperation over transboundary resources. Why is that? Because in the Middle East, the political situation is not that stable. And there is a lot of conflict, political conflict, even civil wars among so many countries in the Middle East, from Iran to Saudi Arabia, and from Iran to Israel, and from Turkey to Saudi Arabia. The political conflict supersedes any regional cooperation related to water resources and water resources management at a regional level. And I insist again that the existing international conventions, as mentioned by Raya, we have almost two, the UN on non-navigational water uses and the UNEC for European mainly. If you look to the Danube Commission, as mentioned by Peter, it's successful because there is no conflict on water quantity. There is no conflict on sharing water quantity, and all parties have the interest of having or improving water quality of the Danube River Basin. When it comes to the Middle East, we have so many issues complicated by certain elements prevailing in the Middle East. As I said, political instability, high population growth rate, political tension, transboundary conflicts, as most of the troubled basins within us, public awareness, as mentioned by Dr. Al-Ansari. Climate change is a newcomer that we are not prepared for it, neither for the adaptation nor for the long-term projections of the impact of climate change changes on the availability of water resources. So these elements led to something like a chaos when it comes to regional cooperation, because this imposed a poor regional governance that reflected on the governance at a national level. And the shared water resources became a recurring point of discussion between riparian countries whenever there is a political tension. And it's already, I said it with regret, that it's already too late to save some of the shared water resources because of the unilateral actions taken by certain countries. And good examples were mentioned by Dr. Khalid Zaman and Dr. Nadir Al-Ansari. De facto of water infrastructure by the upstream riparian countries complicated any future cooperation, because in scarce water countries, we are pushing people to share something they don't have, because everybody in urgent need for water. There is high demand. They don't even cater for the minimum water requirements for drinking water, etc. So we are asking people to share something that they don't have. And therefore, I think, Shami, there is a need, maybe Raya disagree with me or agree with me, I don't know. There is a need for new global conventions that focused on scarce water resources, how to share scarce water resources, what are the basic elements, what are the principles, and we add to it the groundwater element, which was mentioned by Karen. That is a forgotten resource because politicians, they don't see it by their eyes, so they forget it. If you ask me, which is more important in the Middle East, surface water or groundwater? I will tell you without any doubt that groundwater resources are more important than surface water. So we need a new look, taking into consideration climate change, etc. Having said all of that, all these challenges, I think we need, as I said, a new convention to take care of scarce water countries. But for the Middle East countries in particular, we need a water security framework. This water security framework should work on 4 main pillars: environment, human health, sustainability of water resources, and the nexus between water, energy, and food security, which is not easy to achieve, but this is a roadmap that countries with support from international organizations like UN can help countries in getting their minimum needs for a healthy life. And the most important and basic elements for that is water. We witnessed last month the use of water as a weapon in El Hasaka in Syria, which was really a disaster, where people were cut off of water for 30 days because of political tension, because of political overtones among countries. Without blaming anybody, we want to reach a level that this water is for the people to drink, is not a weapon to use against countries or to gain political gains here and there. So this is what I have, Chami, to say at this point.
Thank you very much. We're kind of midway between optimism and pessimism. When we look at, let's say, water abundant countries with regulations that have been in place for 30, 40, 50 years and are living under more or less peaceful conditions, we have one situation which the UNECE represents very nicely in the Danube Basin. We have another situation where we're in regions of water scarcity, economic difficulties, political upheavals, hydro hegemons seem to dominate the situation. And I'm not quite sure how we can take this issue, which Hazem has mentioned, is really, really critical. And from my experience for the last 30 or 40 years of working in this program, the way forward is to have all the world's ministers of water to be the champions of this issue, because they're the ones who really understand it and who can make a difference. So why does this not move forward? We do have good examples of this. We have the African Ministers' Council on Water. We have the Arab Ministerial Water Council. We have the World Ministerial Council on Water, which meets as part of the World Water Council. But it seems to me that some of these messages, which have been very strongly highlighted in the Tigris-Euphrates, which have been strongly highlighted in the Ganges-Brahmaputra, which Hazem has highlighted, particularly raising the humanitarian issue, perhaps are not getting enough exposure. So, and one observation to make is that there are 310 transboundary river basins around the world and about the same number of transboundary aquifers, but there's only 110 river basins which have some kind of a organization which brings the countries together. So for a large number of river basins and for a large number of major aquifers, countries are not yet establishing a kind of a mechanism of collaboration, of hydrodiplomacy. And my question to all the panelists, and I will start by putting this to Peter Kovac, is how do you see this issue from the perspective of the UNECE, which is now going out into the world and making itself available everywhere, how would you like to make this a challenge for the UNECE to bring it around in the world? Because you're the only one that has a secretariat. The UN Convention doesn't, the draft articles do not. You're the only ones. How can you really positively assist the Ganges, Brahmaputra and the Tigris Euphrates, for example, to make the change, to influence the world's ministers of water, to bring them together, perhaps with a big stick, to say, look, you have to do this. You have 1 minute each.
Yes, I have to unmute. Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes. So time is very short to answer to those questions, and because just maybe one comment related with Dr. Hazim said that we do have problems in the Danube Basin as well. I representing a country who are still not solved the problem of water allocation, namely the diversion of the Danube River with our upstream neighbor of Slovakia. Now, at this moment, 80% of the water goes to Slovakia and only 20 remaining in the river, which is a border between the two countries. So we are still stating it's not a share, or it's not a proper sharing of the water resource. So this case went to the International Court in The Hague, and it has a long history already, and it's still unsolved. So there is no solution at this moment. But what is related with the UNECE activities? So the opening of the convention gave also us a possibility to go on the other continents. It's not a regional convention anymore. And why we had to open the convention? Because we had a lot of interest from the other regions of the world. Usually we have only 44 members, but usually during our meetings, either a technical or high-level meetings, we have more than 100, 110 countries are participating actively. What we can use, we are also using or trying to use high-level events also to convince high-level peoples like ministers, state secretaries about the necessity of the cooperation over the over the border regions and also on the water resources. And I also agree that groundwater is very important because in many regions, this is the only resource. And the management of the groundwater is usually are neglected also on a very high level. So I think we need a lot of improvement on that way. And the end of my presentation also contained 2 slides which is highlighting 2 main activities of the UNECE, the water allocation and also the promotion of the cooperation on the transboundary waters. I think those activities also can help. You can follow the processes, and we are producing many guidance documents also. And one such a guidance will be this handbook on water allocation. So we hope that the countries will use those tools and they could benefit from them. Thank you very much.
Professor Khalik, you come from an academic background, science, teaching, and so on. Is your message being adopted by the international community? I mean, the community of the decision makers, for example, the ministerial councils of water around the world. I mean, are the ministerial councils taking on board your message?
Well, we are in the sphere, and political sphere is obviously we try to lay out the facts. That is kind of the role of scientists, to lay out the facts. We really can't really make policymaker to adapt or not to adapt, but we can advocate. We can advocate to accept those. So our advocacy would be in the context of big picture. Like we understand the basin is the natural block. You know, any basin, any watershed is really the natural boundaries, and political boundaries, you know, are artificial, imposed by human. So we have to approach all of this from scientific point of view, and the scientific point of view onward for basin scale or watershed scale. So that's the understanding we can promote to the water ministers or people like Peter or the, you know, other people. I noticed that SDG, for example, SDG, you know, 6.5.2, there are many countries shows interest, for example, and I saw very quickly, Bangladesh was one of the countries who showed interest in it, in the transboundary issues of it, but India did not, for example. So that who is upstream and who is downstream makes a big difference in terms of their attitude.
We're running out of time. Can we have the results of the opinion poll 4? And while we're getting the results of the opinion poll 4, can I bring it back to Dr. Hazem to summarize how you, and let me see results of the opinion poll. Is your region or country, in your region or country, does effort on achieving SDGs include an explicit focus on transboundary? And only 44% say yes and 56% say no. So it seems as though to some extent the SDGs and the transboundary waters are not actually coming together. Over to you, Dr. Hazem, to try and conclude this.
Thank you, Shami, and thanks to all and participants in this important but complicated issue. As we heard from all speakers, every region has its own problems. And definitely there is no magic solution to make countries I think over the coming year, we need to change the mentality of transboundary water issues. We think we should start promoting sharing benefits rather than sharing water itself. Just a quick note on the Ethiopian dam and the Nile Basin issue. If you look to the three countries, they have comparative advantage. Each country has a comparative advantage. And each country wants a different benefit from this Nile River Basin. Ethiopia needs energy, they don't need water. Sudan does not need water, but they need energy. Egypt does not need energy, but needs water. And despite all these very delineated needs by the three parties, they could not reach agreement. Why? Because we focus on sharing water resources rather than the benefits out of it. And by the way, if you look over the last 2 weeks to the devastated floods that came over half of Sudan, this tells us, all of us, that we all big losers when it comes to hydrodiplomacy and regional cooperation on the Nile River Basin. So how to go forward, Chami? I would draft a short statement, as I said, as an appeal not to use water as a weapon against people and their drinking water. And I think in the near future, we will have another seminar focusing on really not to discuss the experience or the problems. What are the ideas to go forward? Is there any ideas thinking out of the box to go forward? I think this will be our next webinar with the distinguished experts that we have and maybe some more. Thank you all again.
Thank you very much indeed to all the panelists. Thank you for the audience for staying with us. We still have 104 people listening, and I look forward to continuing to debate with all of you. Thank you very much indeed for your excellent contributions. And thank you, Hazem, and the excellent team backing us up in the background who've been helping us. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
you.
It was
Thanks.
really a
Bye
nice
to
seminar.
everybody.
We hope that we can continue with this. At least the dialogue should continue. Maybe we'll, in the process, build the awareness among the policymaker and general people and academician, and bring the two sphere together, political and scientific sphere.
Anybody has an idea for the next webinar, please let me know.
Your
So
idea
we
is
can-
excellent. The same people, promote the solution rather
Yeah.
than the problem.
Exactly.
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you all.
working on the solutions.
At least we can hear out what solution everyone is promoting. That we now understand. I was so enlightened to see all this presentation, like, Nadir's presentation and GBM presentation was very parallel in a way. It's not, in a GBM basin is not as intense as it is in the Middle East in terms of conflicts, but it will get there eventually. We want to prevent it before things go bad.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Please stay in touch, all of you, and good luck to all of you.
Yes, thank you, Shami.